Okay, welcome. You have tuned into Henry Weston's Old Mate, the podcast, and we've got a special edition this week because we are international, transatlantic. We have a podcasting recovery superstar with us today. But first of all, before we introduce her, we're going to say a quick hello to Stu. How are you doing, Stu? It's been a week or two since we've caught up. Keeping well?
It has, mate. Yeah, keep it well. Some minor health scares amongst the family, mini ones, little ones a bit poorly. But no, doing well, running plenty, drinking nothing alcoholic, and in a pretty good space mentally.
That's very good. That's very good. And let us then bring in the unashamed alcoholic. This is Becca from, you're in Canada. I want to say Quebec.
I am. Yeah. Hi.
Welcome to the podcast and thank you for giving up your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really, this is fantastic to meet you both. I'm really excited for this.
Excellent, excellent. So before we get into the podcast and talk a little bit about what's going on in this episode, I think we do need to get the bugle out and the celebrations, the fanfare, because we are 2 days away from Stu's fourth soberversary, if that's actually a word. But on the 18th marks 4 years since you stopped drinking.
It does, Phil, and I can remember the last drink almost horrifically because I was basically leant over the bar or the toilet trying to force vodka down my neck while everything else was trying to come up my neck from the stomach. So I don't miss that. And yeah, 4 years. Wow, I don't actually quite know where it's gone. We always say on this podcast, where's 45 minutes gone? I have no idea where nearly 4 years have gone, but they've been pretty good.
Good. Well, I think we might touch on this as we go through, because I think, Becca, you're in the similar time scale.
Yeah, 4 years too, just over 4 years. And the 18th is actually my sort of like, that's my monthly thing too. So I love that, you know, you're celebrating too. I'll celebrate another monthly milestone that day. I feel sort of we have that kind of connection there. That's nice. So congratulations for that, because that's huge. Where does the time go? Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, time flies when it does, yeah.
And you can remember it.
I can remember all of it. Some of it I'd like to forget still, but that's for another podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So congratulations on that, Stu. I think we'll touch on some stuff a bit later on around how you're marking that occasion. But let's go into this episode. And so we've invited you along, Becca, because you've started your own podcast over the last couple of years, and you've told your story with a real aim and a focus, I guess, on just breaking down the barriers and the stigma attached to alcohol abuse, being an alcoholic. And you're quite upfront about, you know, your podcast is The Unashamed Alcoholic. So using that language squarely in front of people. So I guess for the UK listeners, just give a little bit of a background around you, your alcoholism, and what brought you to the point of wanting to get sober.
Ooh, okay, so let's do the Cliff's Notes version of this. Well, you know, I started drinking when I was a teenager. Thought that was pretty normal. Drank pretty heavily in my 20s, and in my late 20s started to kind of think maybe I drank differently than other people, or that I had a bit of I wouldn't even say a problem, because I thought I can't be an alcoholic. For years and years, I thought I can't be an alcoholic because of X, Y, and Z. I'm Canadian, so I've got to say Z. I think the progression up to it was, nothing out of the ordinary. That was, no one around me would have thought I was an alcoholic. I wasn't drinking before work. I didn't have a DUI. Wasn't ever arrested for anything. It was just in my head. It was all in my head. And I was so sick of thinking about drinking, thinking about that next drink. I mean, I got drunk for sure, but frequently, but I wasn't blacking out, and I wasn't putting people in danger necessarily. It was just all that I thought about. And so I wrestled with that for a really long time, that can I have a drinking problem if it's not about quantity or, these big sort of stereotypical alcoholic things. And really when I had kids, was where it became a fight of priorities of, I'm supposed to be, wanting to spend time with my children or thinking about my children, but it's competing. It was competing with that, thinking about drinking. So for a number of years, I really tried to manage it and, like moderate and making promises to myself and saying, oh, I'll only drink on the weekend, or I'll only drink if I go out with people. And that was just an additional thing of trying to manage mentally, what was becoming more and more of an obvious problem. But, it was a justification and rationalization for a really long time. Like, our society tells us that everybody drinks and it's normal. 1, 2, kids are hard and, mommy needs to drink and it's okay, to have that, drink in the afternoon or at lunch or whatever. Kids are tough and all this stuff. So I just kept trying to rationalize and justify. And until one day I just woke up after getting really drunk at my grandmother's funeral. And I woke up and I thought, I can't do this anymore. I was hungover, but I also just was exhausted. And that was in June of 2017. And I stopped on my birthday, which is in July. So I gave myself sort of a month to mentally prepare, because I tried on and off for a few years to not drink, but I knew that this was the end. There was just something. And that, I'd say like, that's my rock bottom, which is another misconception about like what does a rock bottom mean? It has to be some catastrophic event, which it really doesn't. I was just done. I was tired of it. And so stopped in July 2017 and started going to AA meetings a few months later. That's evolved since then too. But I haven't drank since. And so I celebrated 4 years in this July, and had started the podcast in September of 2020. So there's a sort of an evolution in sobriety and recovery too, of my deciding to talk about being an alcoholic, whereas sort of it was keeping my worries about drinking and am I an alcoholic a secret for a long time, then getting sober and being an alcoholic a secret for a period of time. And now it's just like, well, now I'm going to talk about all of it. So that's kind of like the quick version of how I got to where I am today, without, exactly the specifics of how the podcast started, but we can talk about that separately too.
Yeah, no, sure. And I think this, so I think from listening to your podcast, I think there is some definite parallels that we see with kind of Stu's experience, but particularly the recovery side of things, and perhaps the drinking patterns were different, and the day that you decided that you're going to stop came about in a very different fashion to kind of Stuart's. I find it interesting though that you decided in June that you're going to stop, and then in July you did. So it's kind of like having a run up for it, and I guess there was some preparation time, but the part of me, I'm going to ask it anyway, because that's how I am. Was there a final blowout? Did you kind of get smashed one last time, or?
No, I don't think so. I think it was more, I needed to, for me, the number one thing was I wanted a date that meant something to me. So I picked my birthday. So I didn't want an arbitrary date. I know, a lot of people pick January 1st or whatever, like a date that you'll not necessarily remember, but like it's a significant date. And so that's what I wanted. I wanted a significant date. And it was like mid-June. And I thought, okay, if I wait another month, then my birthday's in July. And I didn't want to commit to stopping like that day, even though I knew I'd wanted to. I also knew how hard it would be because I tried it for a long time. So I kind of wanted to commit to it. And then that's it. Like, that's the date you're leading up to it. I definitely drank the day before, but I was around family, my ex-husband's family. So I wasn't drunk, but I knew, and I hadn't told anyone either. It's really fun keeping everything a secret. I hadn't told anyone that was my plan, even though I had a month. I didn't tell anyone that was my plan because I didn't want to fail. Mm-hmm. And so I remember I knew as I was drinking that day before my birthday that these were my last drinks, but I wasn't drunk, but it was significant.
Okay. And that's quite a contrast, I guess, Stu, from your point of view, given that there was no preparation time for you. You were admitted to hospital, and I think that I listened to one of your episodes a couple of days ago, and rock bottom was discussed at quite some length, and I think the contrast in what rock bottom means to different people. But Stu, yours is, I guess, what people might consider as the stereotype of a rock bottom, with an emergency admission to hospital and a realization that you've lost control.
Yeah. I mean, I had a run up at the hospital for about 18 months. I did have a run up to slow it down. I say it's individual, isn't it? But my experience was one where, the alcohol had beaten me, and I can't speak for sort of Becca or anyone else, but mentally, I mean, I was at the point where I had probably experienced a mental breakdown prior to entering hospital. So I had no physical resilience. I had no mental resilience left in me, and that is my rock bottom. And I was literally on the floor crying for help, but that takes nothing away from other people's. Mine, I just sort of approached mine at 100 miles an hour, as it was always going to be with me. With other things, with regards to my mental health issues I've had over the years, they have been sort of more subtle, could I say? And like Becca just said, my problem there was I kept everything a secret from everybody, my struggles, the mental health struggles, and had I approached them a bit more openly, everything might be a different story. But certainly my rock bottom was what you could call stereotypical. I think potentially, definitely in the UK, but I guess around the world, it was certainly alcohol abuse on a daily basis that led to severe physical or impacts.
Yeah. So, but I find the contrast in your experiences interesting, but it touches on something that we've spoken about before, Stuart, with the STEP program with AA, which you got to a certain point and then got off the steps for whatever reason. But it was almost under this. There's almost like a validation tag that comes along with this. And what I mean with that is, like, you don't have to have the stereotype rock bottom of, admission to hospital or your world crumbling apart or whatever for you to make the realization that you need to stop drinking. You don't have to have that kind of soap opera style issue that goes on to be classified as a valid alcoholic or in recovery. And likewise, as you've explained, Stuart, that I'm calling you Stuart, it's Sunday names, we've got guests, with the AA program and the 12 steps, you felt like it was like, that's validation. If I'm going to say that I'm a recovering alcoholic, I have to go through these steps in order to get my medal and prove it. And then there was a realization as you were getting there that it was becoming a bit of a hollow exercise because you weren't bought into it.
Yeah, 100%. As we discussed in sort of the episodes midway through, the story me and you have been telling over a period of time. I think we decided almost from step 2 really that I was probably going to be completing them for the sake of it, and by step 5 I'd got to the point where it was no longer fair on my sponsor or myself to continue, and it was no longer as you said, I felt I needed to attend. If I wanted to sit in my AA meetings for the best part of a year like I did, I felt that I needed to validate that in a way. And so many people had suggested that the steps are the right thing to do and the correct thing to do. And for me, they weren't. And we could spend forever talking about this today. We won't. But that just wasn't a program that fitted me. I mean, AA, I wouldn't be against going back to a meeting, but the steps, they just didn't quite work for me.
You're nodding, Becca, as well. Does this resonate with you?
Yeah, it's funny because I kind of went through something recently where I came to a realization of like what it was providing me and, what I was allowed to do with it. And essentially, I'd been going since October 2017 pretty regularly. Like I really enjoyed it at first. I really resonated with me. I did the steps, but then I was like, well, didn't see why I'd have to keep doing that. So I kind of felt like I was doing it for a period of time. And then when I separated and got divorced, I couldn't go every week because I would have the kids every other day of the week that I would try to go. So I kind of started going once a week, and I felt like, oh, is this allowed? Am I allowed to do this? Like if I'm not going once a week, if I'm making it kind of like a little more infrequent, am I allowed? And I wasn't doing work with my sponsor anymore. I had a sponsor, but I wasn't doing work with her. I was actively avoiding it. And she came to me, I think 2 or 3 months ago and said, like, as I call it, she broke up with me as a sponsor. And I was so hurt and offended because I thought like it meant I'd failed at AA, but she was just like, for her as a sponsor, like that relationship meant or should mean that the sponsee is doing, the steps and this work, and you would connect on this, whatever. And she's like, I understand that you don't need that. That's not what you want or what you need. Like, we'll still be friends. You can tell me whatever, but as a sponsor-sponsee relationship, this isn't how I see it. And so, like a good alcoholic, made it all about me and was like, why, how could you do this to me and all this stuff? But then I was like, well, wait a minute, maybe I don't need a sponsor. And then I was like, can I still be in AA if I don't have a sponsor? Like, am I doing this wrong? And I just, after some kind of talking through it and thinking about it, I realized that like what I'm getting out of AA is really more of the community feel of it. It's not the work. It's not this other stuff. It's the community. It's feeling like I have this gang of people who are there if and when I need them to talk. And, I listen on every other week still to a meeting. I share what's going on in my life. It's just like an added thing because I also have therapy. I also have the podcast. I also have the Twitter community, the Recovery Posse community. I have what I feel like I've shaped into my own program of recovery through these various means that have kind of come about, naturally evolved into what I now, for the time being, is working, and what I now feel is right for me and what I need. So I'm kind of taking what I need from different things, and that's what works. So it's been a learning process. And, it may not be this way in another 2 or 5 years or whatever, but for now it's working for me. And I have a lot of trouble recommending when people say AA doesn't work for me, or what can I do outside of AA? Like I have trouble recommending other programs because I'm not familiar with everything. And I know that AA isn't the be all end all, that it's the one that's really well known, but it's not the one that's going to work for everyone. So I have trouble because I've used it, but then I do all these other things. Not everyone has a podcast where they can talk about it or hear about it too. So, it's really, it is a very personal thing. The other thing about AA is like, I get a lot of people saying, you're in AA, you can't talk about it. Right. It's like, what? Well, can. So, I find the AA conversation is very interesting because it can create a whole lot of other things. But, there are so many programs of recovery out there, and you don't need to be in anyone at all. It's just, you've got to figure out what works for you. My biggest thing is don't do it alone. Find something, but don't do it alone.
Yeah. Excellent. Stu, you want to add anything on there?
No, I was going to make a joke that we're not the Freemasons, but that's probably, it would be ill-timed. So we are allowed to, yeah, of course we are allowed to talk about it. I mean, my general feeling was, as long as if I was going to discuss or write about my time in AA, as long as I didn't really didn't divulge anybody's name and identity, or really locations where we would meet. I mean, although they are freely available on the internet, if anyone's got, the whereabouts to type in AA meetings. But I have written plenty of blogs about my time, or mentioned it in my time, and I do have a little sort of mental battle. Should I be writing this? But I mean, it's my journey, it's my story. I don't divulge names, I don't discuss locations.
Well, it
So
goes
like,
back to, the whole idea of what we're trying to do too. Like people say like, oh, you can't talk about AA. Like, well, okay, no, I can't promote it or advertise it or tell anyone else's story from it, but I can say I'm an alcoholic in AA. And if I can't do that, it's perpetuating the idea that what I am as an alcoholic is wrong or bad or shameful, that I can't talk about this. I can't say it like that. All that does is create the continued idea of this should be a secret. No, I can share my story and share it openly and proudly that I'm an alcoholic who participates on occasion in an AA meeting, and I can talk about the different parts of that because that's me. That's my story. I'm allowed to do that. And I think I should be even more so encouraged to do that because it takes away the idea that this is bad or wrong or should be kept a secret.
Yeah. So you talked a moment ago about the kind of importance of not doing it on your own and kind of plugging into a community of some type, whether that's in person at meetings or taking a step to creating a podcast that's got a good listenership and a website, and in the way that Stu writes his blogs as well. It's kind of coming out in quite a public way is, for me, when I first recognized what was going on from Stu's point of view when he was writing his blogs, it was kind of, that was a big deal and a penny dropping moment in that, wow, I had no idea what was going on. But I guess, what was it that you wanted? So you've talked about kind of making sure that we bring those barriers, the stigma, being able to talk about it, being completely unashamed about your identity. Was that the only aspect of creating a podcast that you wanted to do? How long do you feel that this is got legs, I guess? If you know what I mean? Yeah, that might be an English phrase.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. When I first said that publicly that I was an alcoholic was on a local morning radio show, and it was because they had seen me tweet about a local NHL player who had shared something similar. And I had said, I support him and me too. I'm in the same boat and I'm not ashamed to say it anymore. So they, we had this live conversation and I publicly admitted that I had a drinking problem, and I hung up the phone and I just thought that felt great. Like I was worried a bit about like who had heard that, but I also thought, well, that's a huge weight that's been lifted off my shoulders. And I get chills just thinking about it now, because I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember exactly how I felt when I hung up the phone that morning. And I just thought, now what can I do to keep talking about this? Because not only did it feel like I was free, I'd set myself free from something I'd been kept secret, but I thought, why did I feel like I couldn't have said this for 3 years now? Like at that time, it was 3 years I'd kept something a secret. I'd kept my worries about it a secret, and then I kept my sobriety a secret because of the stigma around it. And I just thought, I don't want anyone else to feel that way, and I want people who don't have a drinking problem to not judge people who do. And so, what can I do? And I just thought, well, my story came about because someone well known, like an athlete, a hockey player, had the courage to share his story, and still had all these fans and people who, looked up to him. And I thought, that's what I want to focus on, is people who are contributing to destigmatizing this through a big platform that they have, using that platform to help spread the word that, look, like, you still admire me or look up to me or whatever it may be. And I don't drink, I'm still cool, and that, because that had helped me. That had been why I came forward. So I started, trying to find people who would be willing to share their story. And, there's no shortage of well-known people who are sober, and more are coming forward because it's becoming more acceptable to do so. And when people do, you just see like this wealth of support and, feedback they get is amazing. So, I'll keep doing it for as long as it's enjoyable for me, because there'll always be someone I can find to talk to. It's a lot of work to try and get someone to agree to come and talk to a nobody, but I have a bit of sort of that credibility now of who I have spoken with that I use to try and attract other people. There will never be a shortage of people I can speak with, which is great. And I'll do it for as long as I enjoy doing it. And, you know, when I first started it, I thought if one person listens to this outside of my mom, then it's a success. Because I mean, it's a lot of work. You guys know it's a lot of hours you put into doing this. So if one person listens to it and I never hear anything from them, but I know one person heard it, then good. Then it's all for a reason. And I have, you know, a few hundred downloads an episode, if you know, when that grows each week. So I know people are listening and I hear some really wonderful feedback, and that's really what matters. It's not that I get to talk to someone famous. It's that someone else who is in my position at one time maybe is encouraged to come forward and talk to someone or stop drinking or whatever it may be, or someone in their life, you know, encourage someone in their life who has a drinking problem, then it's all for that. Like, that's why. So I don't see an end in sight right now. It's when it stops becoming enjoyable to do, which, you know, I feel like I've kind of sounds really corny, but like, I feel like I've kind of found my purpose. Yeah.
No, it doesn't sound corny at all. I think, again, we've discussed on our podcast that exactly the same, almost word for word as you've described that. When you say, Stu, in terms of, you know, the legacy is there, it's on the internet, it will be there forever. And if one person listens to it and gets the help that they need in whatever way, shape or form that comes, then, and we've contributed to that, then it's been completely worthwhile.
Yeah, 100%, Phil. Yeah, I so we know, or as we've discussed, my blog initially wasn't about my alcohol recovery. It very quickly became one. But literally the first blog I wrote, I had a couple of wonderful sort of private messages, and it was only 2 or 3 weeks into the blog that somebody on Twitter who I had never met in my life had happened upon my blog and private messaged me with regards to, you know, their worries with regards to their alcohol consumption, and we are still in contact now. And that was amazing to me, that someone would take the time to message me for help and advice. And yeah, like Becca says, I don't know if I've found my purpose, but I think with what I've written and the work me and you have put in, Phil, with regards to my story, I think we are creating a platform that hopefully will allow us to sort of validate some future approaches to people in recovery in the UK. I don't like to use the term higher profile, really, because, you know, everyone in recovery is on a level playing field. But if we were able to speak to some people who would allow the viewership, the listenership to maybe up slightly, in my eyes, that is not for the benefit of me and Phil to say, look at our podcast. If we can get it out to 800 people rather than 80 people, or 180 people rather than 80, then that's just good for the world, because people listening to our podcast are more than likely either in recovery or know somebody who is struggling. So it's all positive. So yeah, I've gone off track a bit there, as always.
No, not at all. One question that I guess I've never asked Stu, actually, and both you are here now, so which I will ask, is that, and Becca, you mentioned it earlier on with your kind of your 1 month run up to kind of sobriety, but you kept it a secret because you know, if you failed, then people would know. But then coming out on the internet, you know, sharing it globally, you know, there's global access there. Was there, and the internet is a cesspit sometimes, isn't it? It can be a real shithole. And was there any fear that from either of you that perhaps it wasn't a good idea, or did you give that consideration and knew that mentally you were resilient enough to deal with it if it didn't work out? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. At the beginning, it was, I mean, I didn't know where it was going to go because I tried it before and it didn't work. And that's why I didn't want to tell anyone. But when it came to the 3-year mark and I did that interview, I was confident in my sobriety that I wasn't going to drink. That was, I mean, I always, every now and then have a thought of it. Sure. Like, that pops in my head. Will I? No. Do I think about it? Yeah, sure. Like everyone occasionally does, but I was confident enough that when I developed the podcast, that wasn't even, it was never an option of like, like putting this out there. And then what if I wind up drinking? Like, no, it was really totally in the other direction of, this is going to help someone. Like the only objective was help and help change the conversation and help maybe someone who was in my shoes at one point, because it was no longer about me struggling. It was thinking about someone else who might be struggling, like confident. I mean, it sounds so obnoxious to be like, well, at 3 years sober, I knew everything at that point and I could help someone. No, I mean, it was just like, well, I always say we have one experience and story and it's ours and we can give it away for free. And that's what I'm doing. I just feel like I can only provide my own, side of things. And if it helps someone, great, and I mean, that's the ultimate goal. So no, every now and then one flash of like something comes in my head where I'm like, wouldn't it be horrible if I started drinking again? And like, I've developed this whole thing where I'm like the unashamed alcoholic. And then I started drinking, but I mean, it's a flash in the pan kind of thing like that, certainly not my dominant thoughts in this.
Takes then on a whole new meaning as being the unashamed alcoholic if you're actively drinking, which is, not the angle that you want. What about you, Stu?
Similar to Becca in the sense that I didn't write my first blog until I was over 3 years sober. But anyone who's read the early weeks of my blog, it wasn't an alcohol recovery blog. But when it soon became one, I was confident in writing about my recovery because I was 3 years sober and felt like, I don't want to say I'd cracked it, but I had no intention of going back drinking. I did think if I'd started this sort of 4 to 6 months in, that it may well have I wouldn't have known what to write anyway, but I'm glad I had that under my belt. But with regards to negative kickback, I think once I started writing a few, all of a sudden you think, well, I hope, because some of the things I wrote in my early blogs were probably a little bit on edge with regards to some of my experiences. Certainly, I wrote a couple that were sort of mentioned things a bit close to home, some potential work-related issues that I felt a bit aggrieved about, etc. And writing them, I thought there might be a bit of kickback. But with regards to Twitter, Facebook, etc., it didn't really cross my mind. And to this day, I have never had anyone drop by Twitter and say, why don't you just start drinking again? Or who gives a shit about your blah, blah, blah. I think as much of a cesspit as the internet is and Twitter is, and sadly, I've probably contributed to a bit of it over the years. I think the recovery community seems pretty sort of self-supporting, and from people from the outside looking in, it seems very well supported. You're always going to get the odd wally on the internet, but I've luckily not experienced anything myself.
Yeah, same.
Okay, and that is good to know. I think that, there are occasions where a Twitter or Facebook post might actually just restore your faith in the world a little bit, because people reach out that perhaps you've not heard from for ages, or complete strangers, and just kind of touch base and say, you're doing a great job. So good. I'm glad that's been a positive experience. I was also then going to say about how did you know you were ready to come out? But it sounds, Becca, like your one was more of you mentioned something on Twitter, the local broadcasters got in touch, and before you know it, you were speaking about it.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah, I mean, well, so I'd written a letter to the editor of a local paper in February of 2020 when that hockey player Bobby Ryan it was announced that that's where he'd gone for a month and that he was part of this substance abuse program, and had an alcohol problem. So I'd written an anonymous letter to the editor saying, you're part of a club that no one wants to join, but we're forever grateful to be part of. And I know what it's like because I too am an alcoholic, and and said, we'll always support you and that sort of thing, but wasn't ready to sign my name to it. I thought I couldn't sign my name to that. Like, then everyone would know I'm an alcoholic. And so that was February of 2020, September 2020. Same guy was back in the news because he'd won an award, and he was thanking everyone for the support he'd received during that time earlier that year. And I just thought, yeah, like, he publicly said he had an alcohol problem. I have an alcohol problem, or I did, why am I secret about the part that's good? The part that I'm proud of, that I've got sober. Like, everyone still likes him. I still like him. Well, why can't I talk about this? And that's how it ultimately started. I just thought, like, I can. So I went back, I tagged that letter to the editor, brought it back to my Twitter. I said, this was me. Like, I was ashamed to say this before. I'm not now. I'm an alcoholic. And that's pretty much how the whole story started. It was again, I remember exactly where I was. It was such a spur of the moment thing. I was just like kind of angrily doing this, going, yeah, like, me too. I'm not ashamed to say this. And I just didn't, I'm very impulsive, didn't give it a second thought, and just did it because I felt like I'd kept a secret. Keeping a secret, you feel that, it builds and builds and builds. And I'd kept this secret, and it just didn't make sense that I was keeping this a secret. So that's kind of just how it just poured out of me in one instant.
Okay, fab. So, and with your pod, you get some quite high-profile guests on there. So, how does that happen? Have you got kind of pictures of people in like really compromising positions that you can blackmail them onto your show, or what is it that's going on? No, you've got, in all seriousness, you've got some kind of really high caliber guests that come on, and I guess like you touched on it earlier on, that they've got to be confident that you're going to treat their story sensitively and responsibly, and you've built up some credibility. But there's, how do you get kind of Canadian-wide kind of comics and actors and sports people come and talk to you? What's the secret?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is what I mentioned earlier too, which is we all, everyone in recovery, you have this story, you have this experience, and you can give it away for free. And if you can do that and you want to do that, and it will probably help someone, then you do. Not everyone's open about it, but a lot of people are, and they're willing to do that because they know the impact it can have. And if you're well known, it can have an even greater impact because you have this platform to share it on with a lot of people listening. And so a lot of people who are sober and well known come forward with their stories of recovery and sobriety because they know they can, impact a lot of people. So usually it's the person is already, all the time, the person has already said something about being sober or celebrating some kind of thing. And I just kind of find that, wherever that is, in an article or on Twitter or whatever it may be, or someone sends me something and I just reach out to them. So, whether it's through Twitter or through their agent or whatever. And, a lot of times I don't hear anything. Sometimes I hear something, and we connect and go from there. Like I said, I have a kind of a good list now that's built me some credibility. But I don't even know how much of a difference that makes, because when it comes down to it, if they're anything like me, it doesn't matter. You just are willing to share your story if you can, and you have the ability to, because that it will help someone somewhere. So that's what, it's funny because you say like I talk to these well-known people, these athletes or musicians or whatever, but really they're just people who are like me, and anyone else who's listening who is in recovery or has an addiction. That's what it comes down to. Yes, they have this name, but really they're just a person who went through something similar in some way, shape, or form than I did. So it's,
and yeah,
it works out sometimes.
Yeah, and the way that you've just explained that kind of harks back to something, Stu, you said earlier on about it, if you're in recovery, it's a level playing field. Everyone's on the level there. Okay, interesting. Anything you want to add in there, Stu? I think it's something that we're branching out for maybe in the new year. You want to get your merchandise and make podcasts great again and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's I've been meaning to pen a few letters and emails to a few people that I have listened to. I mean, I mentioned, I'll use an example, Paul Merson, a very famous footballer, probably for people of mine and Phil's age will remember him sort of, as a very good England and Arsenal footballer, winning league titles and playing in many, and a very high profile case for, it was probably his cocaine addiction that he found himself in the papers for originally, sort of mid-90s. But he's the sort of person that a lot of people in the UK, and again, I'll say it, sort of men of my age, the men who don't like talking about their feelings and their worries. And Paul Merson has written books and had appeared on many shows to discuss his problems. He actually had quite a high profile, basically, breakdown on Harry's Heroes season 2 last year when he'd fallen back into gambling addiction, actually. So people like that, I would like to, or I will reach out to, because when I was out running the other day, I listened to, I think it was chapter 2 or 3 of his latest book, and it was a short chapter. I was probably running for 4 minutes, but that whole 4 minutes, every point that was made in that entire chapter was my alcohol addiction to a T. And it made me think, it made me feel good, it made me feel bad, but it just made me understand my alcoholism. I already understand it quite well, but it made me understand my alcoholism more and accept it more, even though I'm pretty accepting of the fact that I am an alcoholic and I'll never drink again. But I just thought, this man, and potentially whoever's writing it with him, they've got this down. And obviously tens of thousands of people will listen to, I'd listen to it on Audible. But if that story, and there's hundreds of others, thousands of other stories out there that can be told numerous ways. So let's see who we can get on going forward.
Yeah, no, you make a really good point there as well. I think about just listening to somebody else talk about a similar experience, helping you rationalize it or just even process it in your own head. I kind of have a similar experience so Becky, you won't know this, but 2 years ago I got diagnosed as autistic, and I'm like 41 now, so it kind of came as quite a shock. But actually understanding the language around it and the other people talking about it and being able to put it down articulately helped my, like Stuart just said, understanding and acceptance and kind of what I want to do in terms of talking about it as well. So yeah, no, I kind of see where you're going with that, Stu. Cool. Okay. One of the things that I've noticed in your pods, Becca, is not necessarily a conflict, but an observation around stigma, and your discussions and questions with some of your guests around whether they feel this stigma that clearly you have felt or do still feel. And I think one of my observations was that with some of your guests that have got probably double figures under their belt in sobriety, perhaps are much more comfortable in their skin, a skin that's developed over the last 10, 15, 20 years and perhaps is a little thicker, so don't quite feel the stigma in the same way, or have forgotten about it from when they first got sober. Is that a fair reflection? And because I think there was one guest who just said, no, I don't see that stigma at all. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But clearly you do. So I wondered if that was something that you recognized, and if that was a fair reflection, really, that I guess the further into sobriety you get, the less notice you pay perhaps to stigmas. I don't know.
I think it comes down to how much you talk about it, or are exposed to maybe something negative, right? I mean, I made a lot of assumptions about how people would react to me saying this or starting the podcast, but in reality, I've had no negative feedback, I mean, to my face, but it's all been very supportive. So I think stigma is something a lot of what it is something that's in our heads, about, like, in terms of how people will judge us or react to us. There is for sure stigma against addiction and whatnot, but in a personal sense, I didn't talk about my alcoholism for years because I was worried about how people would react without actually having a basis for that reaction. Right. So I think it's a personal thing. So when someone says, no, I didn't experience that could be very well true. They didn't experience any stigma towards them. In general, there is stereotypes and misunderstandings and stigma and judgment against addiction and alcoholism and, all of everything that encapsulates. But personally, I think it's a different story. I also think that, like, as an alcoholic or an addict, the further you get in sobriety, it's not necessarily like how comfortable you are. You still know that that's a fragile thing that could disappear at any second with any decision that's, you make. So I think there's maybe more of, like, not so much I wouldn't say a confidence, but just like sort of an understanding, a better understanding of what that means to you personally, what your sobriety means to you personally, how you manage that, how you talk about that, how you share it with others. It's such a personal story and journey that everyone deals with differently. So what works for one, just like in AA or a program of recovery, what works for one may not work for someone else. And what one experiences may not be something everyone else experiences. So it's an interesting thing that, we all experience the maybe feedback or support or whatever completely differently.
Yeah. And then sometimes that can also be so situationally based. Like, if you've had a bad day and you get some feedback, that could be like catastrophic.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've just, come back from a run, or you've had a good day or whatever, it's just like, it might be water off a duck's back sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Little English saying there for you. Stigmas.
Could be an otter's back over there.
Could be an otter's back. Let's not go there. It's not that type of show. Stigma for you. What Becca's just said, does that ring true for you?
Yes. And like you said, situational. I mean, I have experienced nothing but support from friends, family, community. Less so with regards to my place of work that has been supportive of my alcoholism, but I think it's fair to say that I have been viewed as a vulnerable individual ever since, and points of responsibility that would have been trusted to me prior to admitting I was an alcoholic have softened or diluted or gone down the pan, if I'm being perfectly honest. Had I not admitted I was an alcoholic, I would probably be further on in my career. Since admitting it, yes, I get a lot of support, but find myself further down the food chain because of it. I don't regret it in the slightest, and addiction is a very complex thing. I don't blame anyone. I'm the addict. I accept that, but yeah, as far as this, as if you want to, I don't know if stigma is the word, but it is my addiction. In many people's eyes, I believe it sees them as I am now a compromised individual, which I'm actually not. I'm far stronger for the last 4 years of my life, and actually far more reliable, and actually far more physically fit, mentally stable. But that is something that I'll continue to work on, and I will see the fruits for it in years to come. Just sadly, it hasn't quite reflected, and I don't blame anyone for that. That's just the way it is. Someone might be watching this and completely disagree with my point, but that's certainly how I've felt.
No, it's a really good point. I think, that how that stigma kind of manifests is, I guess dependent on the person who, where the prejudice comes from. So that's individually based as well, isn't it? And I think what you've just described, which is kind of one of the kind of part of our questions that we worked up really around, you've got these real positives on one hand, in that you feel physically and mentally stronger, you're far more reliable, you're present as a father and as a husband. But on the other hand, there are some downsides that you've experienced through sobriety. All right, and you've just explained those in terms of work. But Becca, do you? I'm going to ask you, give you some thinking time, Stu, for this one. Do you have kind of, what are your highs and lows in your sobriety 4 years in? I'm sure what Stu has just said resonates, but what would you say has been the real positives through getting sober, but then they are contrasted a little bit by some of the lows that you might have experienced alongside, I guess, stigma?
Yeah, I think so. The highs are, I mean, I've been able to completely change my life and realize, I mean, it sounds so strange to say, like, I've realized who I am and what I want and what I don't want. And I mean, I never knew who I was before. Because every feeling, emotion, event, whatever, was accompanied by a drink. And so that covers up everything you actually feel, any genuine feeling or navigating through something. So in sobriety, you don't have that escape. You don't have anything to go on top of, like an actual feeling or emotion or whatever. And so you have to feel everything, and you realize a lot about yourself in your feelings. And so I have gotten divorced. I have started the podcast. I've moved. I've started dating. It's all these things that 4 years ago just seemed like, I mean, that was never, I thought in sobriety I would never have fun. That's why I was really worried about stopping drinking, because I would never have fun. And lo and behold, I have a lot more fun than I ever did before. And I enjoy things a lot more because everything's genuine. But then on top of that, these bonuses of, like, my whole life has changed insanely for the better. So I look back and go, I can't believe I didn't know this was possible, that I could live this life now at 40, happier than I've ever been. And the lows are just kind of mixed in with that, which are, you have to feel everything. You can't escape your feelings. You have to feel everything. So that can be hard. But I know now, even when I feel a low of a feeling or something, in my head, I know what's possible, and I know it won't last forever. I know now that I can get through that, and life will be good again and happy and whatever, because I know now what I feel in happiness and genuine genuine satisfaction with how my life is going and how I'm directing it. I'm leading it. I'm in control. Nothing else is in control other than me now. So I mean, it's kind of vague, but because it's not like a specific thing, but it's just everything's so much better.
Yeah.
And that's my high, is life is genuinely better.
Yeah. And I didn't want this to sound flippant or glib, but you genuinely feel that your separation and divorce is actually been a positive for you.
100%. Yeah. Oh yeah. It was never a negative thing. I mean, it was negative in terms of like, I feel like I'm doing something that, that's maybe not great for the kids, but ultimately it's better because now you have two happier parents. But, or what will people think, when you leave? But I mean, you get over that pretty quickly because you go, I need to focus on me, because if I'm happy, then I can create that around me too. So the kids will be happier. So, it kind of is a domino effect. So no, it was never a negative thing. And it's really turned out to be probably the best decision I've made.
Yeah. And I think something you said as well, just kind of around when you feel the lows, you're actually having to confront them, and that this feeling won't last forever. There's a podcast that I listen to, it's a film podcast, but they kind of speak some sense every so often as well, but they always talk about or they made a joke through COVID that it'll all be all right in the end. This is a film quote that they have somewhere. It'll all be all right in the end, and if it's not all right now, then it's not the end. And sometimes I kind of, when I'm in my low moments, it's completely a corny quote, and I can't remember what film it comes from, but I do think that is right. If it doesn't feel all right now, then we're not quite there yet, and we will get there, and this shithouse feeling will pass at some point. So, Stu, you've done a grand job, kind of multitasking with parenting in the background of podcasting. Anything you want to add to what Becky's just said in terms of highs and lows?
No, she's sort of hit all the notes there, and I mean, it's nothing but positive really for me, apart from, as I've just explained, we won't go back over that. But I think one thing that Becca, I think she tweeted it, or you tweeted it this week, that what we experience in sobriety, at least we know it's real. If we are upset or happy for a reason, even we might be upset when everyone else in the room is happy, but at least we know that feeling is genuine in sobriety. And that was a fantastic, and it's not something I'd ever really thought about, to be honest, but I mean, I've had a lot of sort of mental lows in the 4 years since I stopped drinking, but I processing those lows is actually easier in a way, because you are able to, you can fall back on, in the early years I fell back on what I sort of learned in my time in AA, and now I will fall back when I'm having a wobble. I will fall back predominantly on talking to someone. It might even be Phil, dropping him a WhatsApp, and it more than likely be exercise. But it's processes that I have learned and can trust now. And when I was in my drinking, my active addiction, you'd wake up some mornings and, you couldn't remember a lot of things, but a lot of time out enjoying myself, I may have been in complete inner turmoil for a period of 4, 5, 6 hours, drinking with friends and colleagues, but having the worst time of my life, but no one would ever have known. And I probably wouldn't have known. Past 3 or 4 pints of strong cider and a few rounds of tequila that I was always the first to buy, I was probably having a good time in the moment, but then the day after would have been absolutely crippling. But yeah, as Becca says, really, you can only talk positive about sobriety, and even it allows you to actually be positive about the negatives, if that makes any sense. That could be another T-shirt for the merch line, Phil.
Merchandise still. The negatives are positive.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so true.
Excellent. Okay, so we normally have a self-imposed time limit of 45 minutes, which we've just crashed through by 15 minutes. But I think, you know, in the spirit of having something listenable and digestible for listeners, we'll look at kind of wrapping up now. One thing that I was going to ask, because we are only 9 days away from Christmas, there's only 9 days left of me having to think up something interesting for Elf on that fucking shelf. So cannot wait for those things to go. How do you spend a sober Christmas? What's on the plans for you, Becca, first?
You know, it's funny because I don't, it's like, it's so not part of my life now that you know, I don't, I more am interested in if someone needs, you know, an ear or whatever, that if, and they're going through something around Christmas, because I'm aware that Christmas is a very tough thing with parties and gatherings and all these things you're probably not supposed to be doing right now. But, you know, I'm aware because it was a big event for me to drink. For me personally, it's not something I even think about. I'm very, you know, I'm confident in my sobriety that it doesn't come into focus for me, but I am well aware of it being a tough spot and a tough time for other people. So I'm here if people want to shoot me a message or whatever, just to listen. That's my advice is, you know, you go to places if you want, but you can leave if you want. Don't feel obligated. Don't feel obligated to go. Don't feel obligated to stay. Have like an out, have someone that you can rely on, that you've shared your sobriety or your, you know, worries about staying sober. Have like a buddy, you know, who's there, who can accompany you or who you can talk to afterwards or before and express that thing. So it all comes down to, don't do it alone. Like, you know, it doesn't need to be done alone. Being sober around the holidays does not need to be done alone. There's so many people you can reach out for help or just to listen to whatever. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to, is don't do it alone, because it's so hard. Yeah,
no, good point. And just on top of that, have you got time with family over Christmas?
Kind of. I might see my parents. I'm gonna have the kids around. I feel like school's gonna close a little earlier right now, which is just like, no, no, it's I'm looking at this like sort of long stretch of like everyone's home and like, oh, yeah. No, my mental health is good when everyone's out of the house and during the day and at school.
Yeah. What about you, Stu? What's Christmas for you?
I'm going to have a run, actually. It's only going to be 3.5 miles. But with regards to sober Christmas, keep busy. I went out and bought my slur the other day. It's probably, Becca won't know what slur is. It's fizzy grape juice over here. I'll probably have a non-alcoholic beer, but I'll probably only have one. Christmas used to be I never used to get wasted on Christmas, but I did used to have my first drink about 10 o'clock and then drink steadily. But the thing with Christmas, because it's a social thing, and I never used to drink my vodka around in front of people because I knew the rate I used to drink it, my mum or my wife or everyone would have noticed. So Christmas, I used to just drink cider and lager, which never got me to the point of being properly plastered. But no, I think I've been having a mental battle because Christmas is obviously a Saturday. So that will mean Sunday is Boxing Day. And actually, that is my old home group's meeting day. So I'm having a bit of a battle. I don't think it's hypocritical to go to an AA meeting. I would be going potentially to offer support because I remember how tough my first Christmas was. The first few days of my sobriety. So I think I will try and attend. It's an evening meeting. It's a 7 o'clock meeting. So I think I will try and attend my AA meeting just to offer support. It will be good for me. They always are, but to offer some support. And apart from that, keep busy, keep active. Like Becca says, I will write a blog in the coming days offering the support to anyone over Christmas, but I will probably put a video out. People must be fed up of my videos now, but understanding how, you know, fragile everyone's mental health can be over Christmas. If you're spending Christmas alone, I don't think it's a fun experience. I wouldn't have thought. Some people might choose to spend it on their own, but people who are on their own and don't want to be, it can't be fun. So I am going to be putting something out. Obviously, my fundraiser will have finished by then, but we'll be dishing out some prizes by then. So yeah, we'll just sort of keep the push, but it will be with family. My brother's coming over from the States. He's been there about 8 months now. He's coming home. Well, unless anything changes, he's coming home depending on what mood Boris is in the next 48 hours, I guess.
Okay. Very good. Well, it sounds like a good active Christmas. Lots going on. So let's wrap up there. Wish you both a very Merry Christmas. But Becca, particularly for you, for taking time out of your day to come and share your story with us. It's been a real pleasure. We could probably have done with another 2 or 3 hours we want to talk about, but maybe we can catch up again at another time.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me. I love that conversation. You guys, you asked some really good questions. So I'm always happy to share my story and listen to other people's experiences too. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Becca. And also, Phil, thanks to you. I'm going to get this in before you stop recording. Thanks to you and all your efforts with our podcast, but hosting this one with our first guest. You've done a phenomenal job, mate, and I'm sure you'll continue to do so. So thank you from me to you.
And congratulations again on your 4 years, Stu. That's amazing.
Thank you, Becca. And thanks for all the work you're doing for the community.
Okay, so this is the epilogue, the post-match analysis after our conversation with Becca from Canada, the unashamed alcoholic. How do you think that went, Stu?
Oh, it was fantastic, wasn't it? I mean, like we've just said off air, we didn't cover half of what we'd written down. We probably were never going to, but I think the main body of the podcast was fantastic. And I think what will come across when we listen back to that is that alcoholism is not something that anyone should fear admitting to having in their life. If alcohol is your vice and it has become, a problem, then, and you want to stop drinking, help is out there, and there is a fantastic community globally offering support across, this wonderful thing that is the internet.
Yeah, no, that I think one of Becca's final point. Oh no, it was your final point. You came up with this. Even the negatives are more positive in sobriety, which I think is just, even when it's, you might worry and have concerns about kind of admitting and accepting your alcoholism, that even though there will be highs and lows and it'll be difficult, but once you kind of break the back of it and you're into your sobriety, you start to recognize that even when there are problems that they're better. Those problems are a better experience because you can face up to them and deal with them without the difficulties that alcohol brings to that whole kind of process.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've personally, the Open Golf this year was a wonderful experience, but on the other hand, it was a thoroughly exhausting, debilitating experience for a period of weeks. And at one point during the event itself, I had a particularly tough time. But I was able, with the help of friends and work colleagues, and myself, I was able to fall back on techniques and processes that I have learned and they have evolved in my sobriety to soften the impact of a period of mental instability to the point where it did stop me doing. Oh, it meant that I had to have one evening off during the event, which a few people did anyway. But either in active addiction or potentially in early sobriety and recovery, that may well have put me out of action for the period of the golf tournament itself. But, it didn't, because I was able to fall back on coping mechanisms, if you will, I needed support from some friends. I won't mention names, but there were two guys who were particularly good in that period, very close friends of mine. But yeah, that's I've kind of lost my train of thought, Phil. So you have to.
That's an hour of recording has just completely taken out of you. So we were just saying that, even with the highs and lows, I think what you're saying is like even there with a significant low, it didn't last as long as perhaps it would have done, and being sober meant that you were able to deal with it in the right way.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, great, absolutely. So yeah, I think kind of Becca's voice of reason, her understanding of her own addiction, and then being able to kind of put that out in a really balanced way, it's been interesting listening for me over the last couple of weeks, as we knew that this episode was going to happen, and I wanted to do some homework and listening to some of her episodes, that she strikes the right balance between understanding her addiction and her purpose and the progress she wants to make in kind of making alcoholism something that can be celebrated, the recovery side of that, really, which is awesome. And it's been good listening to her, and it's been great having her on the show to kind of build on that further.
Yeah, and she won't be everyone's cup of tea, because a lot of people will probably want to, or might like to, get on with their recovery quietly behind the scenes. And Becca promotes being very honest, being very upfront about her alcoholism and the things that she's achieved in sobriety. She's been very honest about her divorce. She's been very honest about sort of stepping back into the dating world. But I guess the good thing about social media, it's got a lot of bad elements, but the good thing is the people who want to read her tweets will, and the people who don't will maybe click the unfollow button, and the odd troll might appear. But she said, like I've experienced, no negative impact. And I've put a few things on social media that people could have listened to and chose to sort of be up in arms about, and no one has. And I think the good thing is that hopefully they've either kept it to themselves or just click the unfollow. A lot of people probably won't agree with me sharing a lot of aspects of my story, but again, they don't have to listen to it, and many choose not to.
That's it. Yeah. That all boils down again, doesn't it, to your experience is your experience and Becca's experience is hers, and the individual kind of approach to it has to be tailored so that it's comfortable for you and whatever works. And I'm sure you do recognize it. I'm pretty sure Becca recognizes it as well, that actually speaking openly about it is part of your recovery, is part of your ongoing recovery to understand your addiction better.
Definitely.
But also helping other people in whatever way that, in what other form that comes, will be part of your recovery. Yes,
and the work that we do, you're able to pose questions that probably the people watching our videos or listening to our podcasts are like, well, we'll watch and listen and say, I'm glad Phil asked that, because I was thinking that, and I'm glad he guided Stuart in that direction, because my lived experience is all, all of our podcasts have a certain structure to them, don't they? But a lot of them go off on these tangents, and it's all me speaking from either my heart or just my lived experience. So everything is natural. It's a very honest opinion, and it allows people to see that, and without you there nudging me sometimes. Doesn't want to sound, not in a big-headed kind of a way, but we're able to access information within me that can hopefully be helpful to others.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Anything else that you want to catch up or talk about before we sign off?
I just wanted to ask you, how's the experience been for you? This is going to be episode 15. I just want some Mr. Walton reflections on hosting a podcast, and has it been, I don't want to ask if it's been helpful for you with regards to your autism, but has the podcast been helpful to you generally? Have you found it a good thing to do?
Okay, so let's try and get my thoughts in order there. So overall, how have I found it? It's been something that I've really thoroughly enjoyed. It's kind of opened my eyes into the world of addiction and into the world of alcoholism, and kind of tiptoe into that community that you and Becca just spoke to on the pod. So just getting a glimpse of what that community looks like. By contrast, it's a significantly more supportive community than the autism community on Twitter, which can be at odds with each other, and can be quite very easy to shout each other down, which I find on my worst days a bit distressing, and on my best days I can just, like you say, unfollow and all the rest of it. So I think that's been very, very good. I've liked actually having to do some research about something that I don't know an awful lot about and haven't got that lived experience. So I've really enjoyed doing that. And I think actually more than anything else, I think it's been a positive for me from my mental health to, like, we've talked off air, but we've had kind of in the Walton household a shitty couple of months.
Yes,
but there've been times where I've thought, I can just knock the podcast on the head. But when I think about that and then we get on, I feel about 100 times better having done it, caught up with you, we've had a laugh, we've created something that's useful, but actually just thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. So even in my darker moments where I'm just like, I can't be bothered, by being bothered and doing it, I feel so much better for it. And incidentally, you've asked me a question that's a can of worms, clearly. It's made me think about how my relationship with alcohol.
Yeah.
And I am somebody who can have one drink and put it down. So I know that, and that's it for the night, and that's fine. But it makes me think about and curb, does that need to be every week? Does that need to be a couple of times a week? When I have friends round, do I need to have 4, 5, 6? Why aren't I just enjoying the one or two that I've got? I've even kind of gone down the route of having non-alcoholic beers in the house, because I actually like the mechanics of finishing a day at work and having one beer.
I've whether I've got back into that, I don't think it's a negative thing, but I have been enjoying one can of beer as I make dinner 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah.
But it's one can of beer, and I'll finish the last few sips as we eat our meal. But there is nothing in there, fortunately, that says wouldn't another one be nice? Because I think if that was occurring, then I would probably have to move away from the non-alcoholic beer, because I think I'd be displaying signs of potentially addictive behavior again. I've been slightly concerned with this time of year is bad because we have to buy Christmas presents, don't we? But I know, and I have been purchasing a bit online, but I've had to stop myself so many times from buying stuff that I or somebody else wouldn't need, and I would have been purchasing for the short-term thrill of making the purchase. Yep. So something's working, thankfully.
Good, excellent. So yeah, no, that's how I've seen it. Yeah, it's been a positive experience. I didn't really know what to expect when we caught up in the summer and had a conversation about putting something together. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
Good. Well, I have, just so it's on the record. It's been wonderful, and I mean, we will have a bit of a sort of festive break, and I think we've still got a bit of my story to cover, haven't we? It is coming towards the end, but I'd like to think that there is some sort of work that we can do together. I have no idea with regards to what, but I think the relationship is, we seem to work okay together. Maybe a lot of people might not necessarily say on camera, they might not like looking at us, but listening to us, I'd like to think that we're able to offer something. And I would also just like to say I've actually enjoyed the research element to it.
Yeah.
It's learning, isn't it? And I've learned very basically to edit video and audio, but it's something I would never have done. So yeah,
Excellent.
all good.
Very good. So let's wrap it there, and we'll say yeah, Merry Christmas to you and the family, but also anybody that is listening prior to Christmas. Yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and stay safe away from that dreaded COVID lurgy.
Yes, I Merry Christmas to you, Phil, and to your family, and to anyone listening. If they are struggling, if you are local to Deal and you are going to be struggling over Christmas, drop me an email. I can't promise to work miracles, but if I can help you out in any way, I will try.
What's the email address, Stu?
It's hwomthepod@gmail.com, and I'm going to put it just there in the video.
Very good. Okay, right. We'll speak soon.
Lovely, Phil. Thanks for today, mate.
Bye.